Yes, we are very well pleased to welcome you all to this webinar, the 24th series of FinTech learning series of our knowledge events. And today we are going to be looking at how our FinTechs going to scale, leveraging corporate governance and brand management. It's very clear that most FinTechs are heavily focused on product development and management, meeting regulatory and compliance requirements, also heavily tilted towards towards customer care and fundraising without paying too much attention to corporate governance and brand management. And in the real sense of it, this actually define who we are. Corporate governance, how we manage our brand, is what define the internal dealings of fintech. There is a research by Diligent Institute, and that research shows that 20% of institutions who are better managed at corporate governance, they outperformed others who are not. And in 2019, more than $490 billion was lost to corporate governance deficits. And then 2 years after, those who had lost that amount also lost another $250 billion. So you can see the aggravated effects of corporate governance deficit. And we are strongly believing that based on the experience, the industry presence, the dynamism, and the fact that the speakers at today's webinar are all fintech inclined, we believe that will strongly help us to bring out the practicality and making fintechs to see the need to, look into corporate governance and manage the brand effectively as a tool for scaling to the next level. Let me yield the floor to Simisola Ejisomi, Managing Associate at Chris Ogubanjo Law Practice, who will navigate us through today's session as a moderator. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sean. I just want to appreciate the Fintech Association of Nigeria for the opportunity to moderate this session. I know the weather is a bit cold. It's been raining all morning, but I just want to wish everyone a very warm welcome to today's learning series as organized by the Fintech Association. And the topic we'll be looking at today is scaling fintechs with corporate governance and brand management. Again, my name is Simisola Ejisomi, and I am a managing associate in the law firm of Chris Ogubanjo LP. And today's objective of the seminar, like Sean already spoke to, is to primarily consider the role of corporate governance and brand management in building successful fintech companies. We will also consider in the course of this session the convergence of regulation as well as practical implementation of corporate governance policies, as well as strategies for scaling corporate brands in fintech companies. However, before we get started, I would like to quickly run through a few housekeeping rules, just such that we are all on the same page. The first is that we should all note that all attendees are muted, except for the speakers. This is just to ensure that we avoid any unnecessary background noise that might distract from today's webinar. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them into the chat box on your screen. We're going to have a Q&A session afterwards to respond to those questions. Now, without further ado, I would like to quickly introduce our speakers for today. And the first is Mr. Uche Obi. He's a well-known practitioner in the legal cycle, is the senior advocate of Nigeria with about 3 decades experience in the legal profession. He is the founding managing partner of the law firm, of the Alliance Law Firm. He also has broad commercial and dispute resolution practice that covers corporate governance, banking and finance, fintech, ICT, international trade, capital markets, investments, securities, as well as corporate insolvency and restructuring. He has also published a book as well as written a number of peer review articles and manuals that span across doing business in Nigeria, corporate governance, fintech, data protection, as well as class actions in Nigeria. He was a former chairman of the Capital Market Solicitors Association and the immediate past chairman of the NBSBL's International Trade Law Committee. He is a Polaris Fellow of the Rotary International as well. Thank you very much, sir, for making the time to join us today.
Thank you very, very much. So, my pleasure, and then thanks for having me here.
Thank you. Next in our lineup of speakers is Mrs. Adebisi Adeyemi. Mrs. Adeyemi is also a well-known face, and it's often difficult to talk about corporate governance in Nigeria without reference to her. She is the Managing Director and CEO of DCSL Corporate Services Limited. She was called to the Nigerian Bar in 1987 and holds an MBA from the Lagos Business School, Pan Atlantic University. She's also the president and the chairman of the council of the Nigerian British Chamber of Commerce. She's an expert in residence at the Enterprise Development Center at the Pan Atlantic University, and she also served on the Executive Council of Women in Management, Business and Public Service, known as WINBIS. She's currently the chair of the Governance Committee of WINBIS and serves on the Executive Council of Lagos Business School Alumni Association. Mrs. Adeyemi is a member of the International Bar Association as well as the Institute of Directors. She's very passionate about corporate governance and facilitates board-level learning on various subjects. She also anchors a weekly column on corporate governance in the Business Day newspaper. It is an honor to have you with us today, Mrs. Adeyemi.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Next is Mrs. Adebanke Rimolade. Mrs. Rimolade is the co-founder of Cotec Administrators. It's a niche business advisory firm specializing in corporate governance as well as company secretarial services. She has worked with several organizations within and outside Nigeria, including the Bank of Montreal, Canada. She is a chartered secretary and also a member of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators in Nigeria. She's an independent member of the investment committee of the Lotus Capital Halal Funds as well. Thank you very much, madam, for joining us today.
Thank you, Simi. Pleasure.
Thank you. The fourth speaker on the lineup is Carolina Tenza, the managing partner of SDM Communications. Unfortunately, she won't be joining us today due to a family emergency. We have a trust that our speakers for today will do justice to the topic at hand. Now, we will just dive right into the topic for the day. I'm conscious of the fact that we have about an hour or thereabout to fully look at the angles and perspectives that we want to consider today, and just to ensure that we have sufficient time to also take questions from our attendees at the end of the day. So first of all, I would just want to ask a broad question, which would be addressed to all the speakers, which is, given the experience and practice as to how corporate governance works in reality, not just the theoretical aspect of it, I would want for each one of you to please describe, how your own understanding or how you would express what corporate governance means in practical terms, as well as your opinion about brand management in that light as well. So first is Mrs. Orimolade, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Simi. I'll bell the cat, so to speak. Well, it's good to be practical, and I'm very glad that we're actually discussing this with the fintech ecosystem. Corporate governance for me is just the way companies, as the name suggests, companies are governed, really. And not just companies, obviously not for profits and what have you. And within that brief statement, there's a lot that we can unpack. So when we say companies are governed, we're talking about structures, we're talking about policies, we're talking about practices, we're talking about rules, so many mechanics in terms of how the company is governed. And I think one thing a lot of people are familiar with, okay, you want to set up a company, who will be on the board? So a lot of people are familiar with having a board of directors or having some people right there at the top. So we can say in terms of the hierarchy regarding corporate governance, we can talk about your directors, we can talk about other stakeholders as well. And this is the modern way of looking at corporate governance, in the sense that we're just not looking at the shareholders or the people in the company. We're looking at all stakeholders, because we have to balance the way power and authority is kind of allocated within all those things I spoke about, in terms of the rules, the structure, the practices, the policies, and what have you. We have to ensure that the stakeholders, all the stakeholders, the regulators, fintech is an area that is highly regulated. They're part of the stakeholder, the ecosystem of the fintech. Your shareholders, the investors, a lot of, like Shemun said, the focus for most people, right, is to fundraise, but your investors are not the only ones you focus on. Your environment, we're living in an ESG driven environment now, where there's a lot of focus on that. So for me, I would say that it's the way companies are governed, taking into consideration all those mechanics and taking into consideration your various stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malade. Mrs. Adeyemi, your thoughts? We're just trying to lay the foundation.
Thank you very much. And I think that Bank has said quite a bit about what corporate governance is. So essentially, it's a system by which companies are controlled and governed. And there are lots of the principles. We know the principles of corporate governance, but I think more importantly, to bring it really practical, like you said, so that we're not just talking theory and principles here, is how is the company led? For instance, what's the leadership? Who are the people responsible for leadership? Is it the founder? Because really and truly, we're talking to fintechs. A lot of them are founders, and they are startups. They want to go and raise capital, and they want to run the businesses. They're the ones who have the idea. Is it enough to just be a founder and the one who is the visionary and the one who leads? Do we need another layer of leadership beyond that of the founder? It's also about strategy as well. Who determines that strategy? As founder of a business, I'm very passionate. This is the way that I want to go. I probably have an idea, and that idea I've turned it into value. It adds value to people. So I just want to get up and go and just assure that I do what it is that I need to do, raise money, and then begin to, as it were, roll in the money and grow. There's also the bit about ethical leadership, or ethical culture of the organization, and we have seen that being, the consequences of not placing enough emphasis on that in the recent past. So who determines that? What's the place of ethical culture in an organization? All of that goes to speak to corporate governance. There's also the issue of succession, and sustainability. So, I mean, without going into the details of all of that, that's what corporate governance connotes to my mind. So it's beyond just like Banker has said, lots of the time people think it starts and stops with the board. No, it's all the processes, the structures, the policies that you put in place to ensure sustainability for the entity, and also that you deliver value to the stakeholders. We have gone past the stage where you set up a business and the ultimate objective is to satisfy the desires or the wishes of the shareholders. Now we have a paradigm shift where we're looking at stakeholders, and that bucket, I can assure you, is a very full bucket. There are all sort of interests that constitute stakeholder interest. So that, to my mind, is what corporate governance is about.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Adeyemi. Mr. Obi, your thoughts, please. You're muted.
Sorry about that.
Okay. I hear you now.
Thank you very much. I believe that Banke and PC have more like covered the subsets, and those issues they have mentioned are all um, representative of what corporate governance is all about conceptually. I will simply summarize, by referring to a very, very apt description of corporate governance, and that was the one made by Pat Barrett. Pat Barrett was the former Auditor General of Australia, and if I may quote, he simply said that corporate governance is about how an organization is managed, its corporate and other structures, its culture, its policies, and the ways in which it deals with its various stakeholders. It is concerned with structures and processes for decision making and with the control and behavior that support effective accountability for performance, outcomes, and results. So if you look at what have been said by the last two speakers, you find out that they have covered it. And that is what corporate governance is all about. It's all about how an organization will be governed so that it can meet the desired expectation. It can all good at law and in terms of the corporate objectives. And that is basically what it is all about. And for that to happen, certain things must be in place to ensure that you have the right kind of board, that you have the right kind of systems and processes with which that organization can run. And we will not also lose sight that this will help the company meet the expectations of, of the various stakeholders. And again, probably we may also talk about a bit of a definition of brand management as well. And it is basically a marketing strategy deployed to increase value and reputation of organization and their products as well as services. So there is a convergence. There is proper corporate governance. The organization will be perceived in a very, very positive light. Similarly, it helps to brand it. It equally helps in how the organization is perceived. And that's the little we can add to this. Otherwise, we've more like covered everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Obi. Now, from all the descriptions and definitions given, what is clear is that corporate governance is a compendium of a lot of things put together: policies, stakeholders' interest, board composition, ethical values, and all of that. Now, with brand management, primarily, it deals with the perception of the public. It deals with how it shapes brand management, it shapes perceptions. And many times in practice, notwithstanding that many companies are aware of what corporate governance values and principles are, there is always the consciousness in shaping public perception to put forward their best foot, notwithstanding whatever reality they might have back end within the company. Now, Mrs. Adeyemi, I don't know if you can help us with this. For fintechs that they are more not often driven by the need to raise funds and maximize interest. Now, how would you advise, or what are your thoughts as to how fintech companies are expected to discharge the corporate governance functions internally while at the same time uh, being transparent and manage it sufficiently and adequately public perceptions as to the operations without drawing the line, without crossing or breaching the basic corporate governance principles, while at the same time not drawing undue attention of the regulators and not also inciting panic with the investors. Yes, it's important for them to do it, but in a bid to be transparent and imbibe all of this corporate governance values, how do they manage the perception of the public in that light in a way that would not affect the operations and business adversely?
Thank you very much. And I like the way that Suchi has said, there's a convergence between managing the brand and corporate governance. And you also have said it, that a lot of the time is about perception. How do we want to be perceived? But perception, again, is also reality. So we shouldn't spend too much time on because sometimes when people talk about brand, it's easy to say, oh, it's a marketing tool. We have to look good. How do we look on social media? What does our logo look like? What kind of how do we appear to people? How do we dress? Are we conservative in our dressing? Of course, the techies are not. They're the ones that wear one t-shirt the whole of the week. But that's not really and truly what brand is from a governance perspective, if you're looking at it that way. And the truth of the matter is that, and this is what I believe very strongly, that if you get your governance right, it can be, it is indeed a competitive advantage, because you have gotten your systems right, you've gotten your leadership right, you've gotten strategy right, you have structures in place to deal with risk management, you have structures in place to deal with ethical conduct, you have put structures in place to deal with succession planning and business continuity. All of those things that you have put in place because you're properly governed, because you have adopted good corporate governance, now gives you, makes you look attractive, not just to your would-be investors, but to your customers and to the investing public and otherwise. So that's why I said there's a convergence. You're doing things right, and it becomes second nature. You're not forcing yourself to. You have a board in place. Let's even start with that basic one. It's not basic for a lot of people, but let's imagine that for the purpose of this conversation, it's basic. You set up a board. The expectations of you as a founder, as a startup tech company, the expectations that the board have of you would be different from where you are the be it all and know it all. You're the sole proprietor. The board expects you to keep proper books of accounts. It expects you to have a process for hiring and firing. All the things that we hear these days about people being, facing all sort of abuse at work and all of that. People not having detailed letters of employment, or people being told to go without any process. So you're accountable as founder. You're accountable first of all to a board, and that board determines what is obtainable here. So you yourself have to be accountable. There's that principle of accountability. As owner, you're accountable to the board. The board is accountable to shareholders and all of that. So the fact of your being accountable, make sure that ensures that you have to now then put all of those processes in place. So if, for instance, you have risk management in place and COVID happened, I can tell you that some organizations, when COVID hit, totally were grounded in their operations because they didn't have any business continuity plans, they didn't have any risk management in place, and some who had was just on paper. But if you have a board to whom you are accountable, you have to report to them on how your risk management would respond to an eventuality such as COVID. And as far as the brand perception is concerned, imagine what would happen to the brand of an organization who couldn't deal with COVID. No matter how much PR you do, no matter how much whitewashing you do, no matter if you hire the best brand managers, they can't. What story would they tell? What would they say happened to you? So there is that convergence, and it's important to understand that you can't do brand management and understand it to just mean, oh, getting the best brand managers in the world to package. So it's not about packaging. It's actually about owning the values, living them, and implementing them. It becomes a way of life, and it's that way of life that translates into a competitive advantage that we have come to understand as actually managing the brand.
Thank you very much for that, Mrs. Ademi. So, from what you have said, what I gather is that instead of placing the cart before the horse, the first thing to do is get the corporate governance values and policies right. That would set the
Absolutely.
tone for the brand management. Once that is in place, that would follow. It's not the other way around, where many times we're
Absolutely.
chasing to shape perception over little things that in the long term are just they're not the main, they're not the important issues. But
Absolutely.
once the corporate governance values are in place, brand management becomes quite very easy for the company to just
And you have a story to tell, because I mean they can see, people can see that, and without mentioning names, if anything goes wrong with any of the tech companies that we have around, the first thing people would ask is that, where's their board? Who are the members of the board? Do you understand? So there's a lot of emphasis placed to governance, and you can't whitewash a brand if the fundamentals are not there.
Thank you very much for that. I think that just, sheds a lot of light on, the things we hear, the things we see in practice. So instead of chasing perception, spending too much on adverts, and trying to shape public opinion on little things, the board first, corporate governance values, once those are in place, all other things will follow. Thank you very much. Now, Mrs. Orimalade, I know that Mrs. Ademi has spoken to this a bit, but I would also like your thoughts as to what uh, governance ethics or the lack of it, or corporate governance values or the lack thereof, the absence, the absence of this, which what corporate, the absence of what corporate value would mar a fintech company, as in the basic that they should have, the absence of which would definitely, you know, just sets it just makes it a function of a matter of time before, the cat and then the entire building comes falling or crashing down.
Thank you, Simi. As BC has rightly said, she mentioned something. She said ethics and culture. And culture is driven from the top, you know. And there's certain principles, and which you also referred to in terms of corporate governance that need to be in place. I to be sincere, I would really like to, because sometimes corporate governance can seem theoretical to a lot of, particularly like BC also mentioned, entrepreneurs, they're all about fundraising and what have you. This is not theory, really. Um, your character, the character of the company, is very critical and will impact your fundraising. Recently, I think it was OPay that was able to raise $400 million or so. How there's something investors are looking out for, and like she also rightly said, it's a competitive advantage. In fact, it's a fundraising advantage if you have a sound corporate governance framework in place. Now, at the stage where you're just starting, and because I realize that that is sometimes a challenge for entrepreneurs and founders, because they're so focused on that, they don't really have eyes, or they don't have the mindset on these corporate governance issues. So the expectations for you at that stage may not be okay. You should be flying at the level of a public company in terms of corporate governance, but you should have it in mind right from the onset, so that it becomes baked into the culture of the company right from the onset. Ethics, things like accountability, keeping proper accounts. Nowadays, you can, if you don't have the capacity financially, but I'm sure during fundraising, one of the things your investors will tell you, having worked in a PE firm, is that the CFO should be someone that has experience, is one of the key positions that has to be in place. So principles, in terms, going to your question, in terms of, okay, what are these things that will make or mar a company? Things like accountability are important in terms of your financials, even in terms of brand, as we have said, in terms of people. You shouldn't treat people anyhow. There should be an HR policy in place. There should be a hiring strategy in place. Things like openness, very, very important. You have to ensure that what you position yourself to be is what you really are. And again, referring to what we just said in terms of brand, if you're positioning yourself out there as being, whitewashing yourself, but you don't have those structures and the framework in place, it's bound to collapse. So you need to be open, and people, you need to share information. People need to see you for who you really are. Things like transparency, again, going to the things of finance and so on and so forth. Compliance, your regulators need to see that you're transparent. Like I mentioned earlier, fintech is a highly regulated industry, and you have to be transparent. You have to file your documents as required. You have to make the returns as required to your regulators. You have to be open with them. Things like being fair, even in terms of how you deal with your personnel. You shouldn't elevate one person above another. These are things that leak out, because we're in the social media industry, age now. You can't hide anything. And you have reputational risk. is part of your risk management issues. So these are some of the ethical issues. And like we're human beings, and this is one thing I always tell people about corporate governance, that unless the human being decides to do it, it just becomes a box ticking exercise. So, and that is a danger that companies should always watch out for, especially startups in the fintech industry. It shouldn't be a box ticking exercise. It should be something that the founder, the entrepreneur, right from the beginning, is able to say, these are the principles that we want to lead, we want to walk the path on in terms of corporate governance, and then drive that, and then everybody will flow with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, my next question will be addressed to all the speakers, and um, it's in relation to the regulations we have, the codes that we have for corporate governance in the country right now. If you look at the codes and the regulations we have on corporate governance, I would say they're divided into two broad groups. There's the Code of Corporate Governance uh, that covers general matters, as it that covers companies irrespective of the sector, and then we have the sector-specific ones. And for many fintechs, they are primarily regulated by the CBN and then the SEC. So the Code of Corporate Governance codes that apply to finance institutions, invariably applies to them. And I noticed that in the regulations and the rules that have been released by CBN in the past few years, there's always a rule there that says that the CBN Code of Corporate Governance is what would apply to fintech. So in addition to the code issued by the FRC, which is the broad one that covers all sectors, we then have this sector-specific ones. In your opinion, do you believe that all of the sector-specific ones and in the general code that covers all corporate entities, do you believe that they're really tailored to suit companies, in the sense that, what are your thoughts as to whether the current codes that we have they suffice for fintechs, or whether, in your own opinion, there should be a separate sector-specific one that is adapted to the uniqueness of fintechs, being that many times they're new entities, barely 5 years old. They're trying to chase investors. They're trying to do a whole lot of things at the same time. And then having to impose the strict provisions of all of these codes on them. At times, it's not practical for them to live up to the expectations and the provisions of this code. So I'll start with Mr. Obi in this regard. I don't know, what are your thoughts? Do you believe that the codes we have right now, do they sufficiently address the needs of the fintech companies that we have in the country right now? Or is it your opinion that there should be another one created, so to speak? The regulators should come up with another one that is tailored to suit their specific, unique circumstance as we find them in today's world. Mr. B.
Oh, thank you very much, Simi.
Yes.
Um, um, First, we have to understand the current position of our law um, regarding corporate governance in Nigeria. Yes, there are a number of laws, and there are also a number of codes. For instance, the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2020 has provisions tailored towards corporate governance. Similarly, the Investment and Securities Act 2007 equally have provisions. And the targeted audience, as well as we then have the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance that came out in 2018, which is of general nature. Then we have the OFIA, as well as the CBN code targeted to banks and financial institutions. Now, breach of provisions or principles of these various laws and codes have diverse implications. Some, there are sanctions in the nature of fines and penalties In some cases, also there are other kind of uh, reactions aimed at companies that are in default.
Mm-hmm.
In some other circumstances, they are basically prescriptive, just aspirational for people to aspire to, and they cover a wide range of issues. Broadly speaking, composition of the board, selection of its chairman and CEO, independence of the board, um, committees, including audit committees, meetings, issue of multiple directorship, shareholders' voting rights, board responsibility, disclosure, and a whole lot of other things. Now, the overarching objective of all the board, truly efficient, proactive, functional, transparent, and uncompromising. Um, then we must note that certain entities are regulated by more than one of these codes and laws. In some cases, almost all of them. For instance, the case of banks that are quoted on the exchange, the banks will be regulated by the CAMA, they'll be regulated by the SEC codes, they will also be regulated by CBN as well as BOFIA, as well as the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance. So there must be adherence to all of these. And the principle has always been that higher thresholds would become the norm for such entities. In other words, they must meet the most stringent requirements and compliance regime before they can be adjudged fully compliant. Your question as to whether the fintech, sector would need um, certain sector-specific code, I would say yes, because of the peculiar nature of fintech business. Part of it is tech, part of it is finance, and within even that broad spectrum of financing, some appeals towards the banking services support, and the other goes towards capital market and investment. So you find out that you will need a set of governance code that will bestride all these um, competing subsets and elements. And this has to be carefully thought out in the sense that multiple agents will have to be involved for you to get what will be suited for the fintech industry, as it were. Having said that, too, I must say at this point that in introducing corporate governance codes or principles to the fintech industry, we must be able to make the salient value propositions. As
Okay.
earlier noted by the moderator and also BP, most fintech organizations are value driven. They want to raise their money. They want to leapfrog to other things. Probably they will be saying things about governance as one of those little things that don't really bring the particles in terms of the results they want. And therefore, we have taken pains as a firm to decode that. In other words, we will be able to demonstrate what are those values to be attracted to an institution, a fintech institution, to embrace governance. It has to be adequately explained because governance has a cost.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It costs a lot of money. It takes a lot of money to gather and
True.
institute a credible board of eminent personalities because they need compensation regarding their time as well.
Mm-hmm.
To build up credible systems and processes that will make the organization governance ready. will also cost money. Now, an organization going to create budget for this will equally need to be assured that there's sufficient value proposition and a cost benefit analysis had to be done. And what we have managed to tell a few that we have been exposed to are that legally and commercially, there are quick wins associated with governance that can equally be monetized for you to see.
Okay.
A, mandatory compliance regimes means that there will be sanctions against an organization that is erring. Some of those will impose fines of like $500,000 on the first instance and for any other day of default. Therefore, if you do not comply, you are going to be paying these sanction penalties. There could also be other administrative sanctions.
Okay.
Then, akin to this is a second problem. The organization, that company will not be allowed to be listed on the NGS or any other investment exchange because they will not able to conform with the listing rules. For instance, the Nigerian Stock Exchange, the NGS, says that the company must score at least 70% in corporate governance rating system for it to be qualified to be listed on the main board. So that means corporate governance readiness is an integral part of IPO and flotation readiness. Therefore, it is not, if it is not there, you will not be able to list. If you are not able to list or conduct an IPO, you may not be able to raise it.
That's true.
Second point is corporate governance contributes to higher entity valuation, higher share price deck, and lower cost of raising capital, both debt and equity, including listing. Now, companies who are very, very strong on governance naturally will be seen as credible candidates to be considered, either from the angle of an investor or angle of fund provider and all that kind of things. In fact, there was a particular quotation I came across lately, and that is by Gabriel O'Donovan in her work, a board culture of corporate governance.
Okay.
And she simply said that the perceived quality of a company's corporate governance can influence its share price as well as the cost of capital raising. And BC has also made this point, and to an extent also by Banke and the moderator, that fundamentals are necessary, and you must demonstrate that for you to be able to have the right kind of perception. And if you have that right kind of perception, it becomes easier for you even to borrow internationally and locally, because today, some companies that are very strong on governance and have that reputation borrow on the back of negative pledge. You don't need to pledge anything in the company. You don't need to get the shareholders and directors to pledge anything they have in the whole world for you to get facility. They simply could borrow on the back of negative pledge, which is simply means that we cannot sell anything while we are having your fund, except we're able to pay back your fund. So lastly on this is that corporate governance encourages a risk-based management regime, because that is why the board is there to put in place adequate oversight that will lead to loss containment and returns optimization. So with this kind of value proposition put forward, tech companies would say that they are not losing anything investing in governance. Instead, they are going to benefit.
Thank you very much, Obi, for that. Thank you for walking us through the extant codes and then the regulations we have that regulate corporate governance in Nigeria, as well as the benefits that it pertains for companies. I know that we're a bit short of time, but Mrs. Adeyemi, I would like to know your thoughts and opinion as to whether I think the codes and the regulations we have in place right now, do they suffice, or was there the need to uh, establish or create a separate code out of the ones we have, that would be best suited for fintechs, bearing in mind that more often than not, they're private companies. Their own requirements at startup is less stringent than you would find the regular FCMG company trying to start up. What are your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So first of all, I would like to have share a slightly different view from the general view that
Okay.
fintechs, this industry is highly regulated. I think it's underregulated, and I think they get away. I think they get away with a lot of things because a lot of them are registered outside Nigeria. So they go to
Yeah.
jurisdictions where it's possible for them to attract funding, and so
Mhm.
I think the CBN looks at them as a strange animal, doesn't even know, how to regulate them, how to treat them, because before you say anything, they will tell you that, oh, we're a San Francisco company, I'm registered in the Isle of Man, so they
Yeah.
have, so I, to that extent, I think that they should take the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance as a code of best practice because that's what it is.
Okay. Yes.
So as minimum standards, and I think that as minimum standard, that code is just perfect. However, I think that because of the peculiarities of that sector, there might be need not to have a code, a separate code, but maybe guidelines that will be a bit more stringent, than because I mean, really and truly, like I said, the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance is a code of best practice. So what you want to do is to identify some of the areas that we need to be specific about for them. So they are not, for instance, you look at the independent director, you might say to them, for instance, have one, which is what the Nigerian code says, rather than insist on the two that CBN says, and then have them scale, as they grow. So have those guidelines that would address certain key issues. Because for me, I think that some of the codes, some of the guidelines leave little discretion to the board, which is why my preference really ultimately is the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance. That I think that for some issues, it allows the board to take a decision. So yes, so my thoughts are that let every fintech that wants to start from their beginning, from the day one, use the
Mhm.
Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance as a code of best practice, tailor the activities along the lines of that code. And for the regulator, let them begin to look at the nuances peculiar to that sector and have a set of guidelines, not too many, because again, you don't want to scare these people by having, so many things to comply with. That would just, scare them off governance itself. Identify a few issues, 5, 6, 10 issues, and be specific as to what compliance would look like. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Adiyemi. Mrs. Orimalade, what are your thoughts? Uh,
I would align with what BC just said, actually. There are quite a bit already in terms of codes as Uche took us through. So I think it's better to have that minimum, use the Code of Corporate Governance 2018 as
yes.
the minimum, and then have a guideline for this ecosystem, especially again, because there's a lot of advocacy going on, and we're on such a platform, for instance, the FinTech Association. For them, for the FinTech industry, I would say that they need to push more in terms of advocacy. It's also part of corporate governance. You need to engage with all these your regulators. I feel for them. I've been part of that space, PE firm, and where you have to crisscross from one regulator to the other, just trying to understand and trying to, and there doesn't seem to be any cross operational body, that can help. So a lot of advocacy will be required on the part of the industry to maybe try and set up something like that, specifically for this area. And there are always people that can help. Like Abisi said, nothing too extensive. Because which you rightly said, governance is expensive as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. In order to ensure that we have at least time for one or two questions, I'll just take last words from all the speakers at this point. And in that regard, what I'll be asking is that what are your tips? What will be your nuggets? What would be your recommendations for fintech companies in terms of governance ethics to adapt and proper strategies to upscale the brand? I know that we've spoken to this to some extent, but just for you to tie it up as last words before we wrap up for the Q&A sessions. In your own personal opinion and from your experience, for this fintechs, we understand that indeed, yes, the general codes might apply, but to ensure specificity and that the codes are really tailored to suit and are practical enough, to for adaptation for them, we need to sort of streamline certain things. So, last words, as in your overall view as to what are your tips, what will be your nuggets to any fintech that walks up to you today to say, oh, we are 3 years old. We can't afford. It's expensive, we know, but we can't afford to go the full stratum. So, what would your advice be to them? The basic that they can, the minimum, yes, to adopt, but in order to have these things in place for proper upscaling of the brand, what are your last words in that regard? I'll start with Mrs. Adeyemi.
Okay, thank you. I mean, and it's for me, it's very simple. And people who know me know that this is my this is my area of passion.
Yes.
It's to set up a board. Like they say, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and every other thing would follow. So set up a board. In setting up your board, identify. Don't go and pick your friends. Don't go and pick the people you went to school with. Identify people that are going to add value that you can be accountable to. Because for me, that's the most important principle of governance. If you get accountability right, it's everything will fall into place. People that you can hold you accountable. So put together a board. The board will ensure that there's processes, there's transparency in the dealings, there's fairness in the dealings, all the principles of corporate governance. But that's what I will say. I mean, and that's minimum standard. And you don't have to have a board that you're going to be thinking, oh, I'm a startup, how much am I going to pay them? People are in the stages of their lives where all they want to do is to add value. They're not, yes, at some point when the fintech begins to make money, and it will make money, when it begins to make money, then you can pay them commensurate. But at this point, you're looking for people who, what is driving them to join your board is not how much you can pay them, but what value they're able to bring to the board. Once you do that, they will ensure that every other thing sort of falls. But people are so scared that, before I go and talk to, Simisola, she's going to be wanting to collect certain allowance or director's fees or whatever. For all you care, Simisola just wants to add value. She probably just wants, somewhere where she would know that she's making a difference. And when you blow, as they say in Nigerian parlance, then you can pay her appropriately. So that would be my number one advice to a fintech startup.
Thank you very much. I think that just hit the nail on the head, as it's setting up a board, not just a board, but maybe to add my Mrs. Adeyemi, an effective board,
An
not one
effective board,
comprised, yes,
absolutely.
comprised of family and friends, but people that are willing and
Absolutely.
ready to add value. And that's just the
Absolutely.
foundation. Once that is
Yeah.
in place, a lot of things will take
Mm,
up from there. Thank you very
absolutely.
much for that. Mrs. Arimalade, what are your thoughts?
Exactly. So just to take a step back from what BC said as well. So she said something. She said people are scared and what have you. You're starting up. A lot of times you don't have the knowledge. You don't know.
Mhm.
So I would say seek knowledge, right? There's so many things out there. So many you can Google. You can learn. Don't put this on the back burner. Don't say, oh, this is something I can do later. By then, it will be too late. The house may have collapsed. There's so many examples. Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos, so many of those people. Look at Twitter, Elon Musk had the Twitter seat and everything. Yes, penalties. So don't put this on the back burner. Seek knowledge. There are people that can advise. Like she said, it's not everybody that wants it's making the big money and everything. Some of us are in this space to help because we have a passion for to see that businesses do the right thing and they grow as well. We're not here to restrain, we're not here to restrict. So please seek knowledge, seek advice. You can get it. It's out there, and there are people that are willing to help. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So, like, just to borrow Mrs. Adeyemi's words again, seek ye first the kingdom of God. In this instance, seek ye first knowledge, and every other thing will be added to it. Mr. Obi, your last word, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm in complete alignment with BC and Banke on what they have said. But however, I need to add that the starting point will be for entities to seek the right advisory. You need to be advised on things that are optional or prescriptive. You equally need to know those that are mandatory that you must do as a minimum standard. And if you fail to do them, you probably will start incurring some sanctions, wrath of the law, investigation, prosecution, and the rest. So the right advisory will be necessary. Then, when that has been done, corporate governance will evolve in the sense that the nature of business as well as the circumstances of the company will be taken into account in adjudging whether they are compliant or not. So if, for instance, a business starts um, a business focused on dealing with investors' funds, then there's always a higher threshold that must be met before even there could be an entrant into that space. However, if it is a general round of business, there's probably more opportunity for them to gradually upscale and evolve. Like we have always noted earlier on, governance has its own cost, but actually the benefits outweigh the cost. And therefore, the right advisory will be necessary in terms of knowing what to start with as a minimum standard up to the time probably it will be upscaled to meet
Yes.
international standard and best
Standards.
practice.
Thank you very much for that. And just to add to that, I think our lineup of speakers today, sufficiently show that we have the professionals to advise any fintech company in that regard. Uh, we have some questions coming in, and we might not be take all, but I would just want us to take a few, one or two. Now, there's a question from Andrew Davis, which I would want to address to Mrs. Adeyemi. And this question is that what role should business insurance play in establishing a strong governance framework and mindset? I'll take that again, Mrs. Adeyemi. What role should having a business insurance play in establishing a strong governance framework and mindset?
Thank you very much. I mean, that's just one aspect because that
Mhm.
speaks to risk management.
Yes.
I mean, and one of the things I had said earlier on is that that's part of governance. So you have scoped your risk. There's certain risks that you can accept. There's certain risks that you would have to,
Mhm.
sort of just push away from you, and there's certain risks that you would have to put in place mitigants. So the risk that you can insure will be there. You insure against fire, you insure against all of those things. So yes, it is indeed part of the corporate governance, but it's not a replacement. You can't say that, oh, I'm going to safeguard, I'm going to sort of ring fence my business against the likelihood of failure, and so I go and insure. There's certain risks that you cannot even insure anyway. Which is why, like I said, it's important to have a board who will help you determine the kinds of risks that you can take. They will even help you define what your risk appetite is.
Mhm.
As owner founder, there's that sense of wanting to achieve and not even minding, so just sort of taking a pause to consider what are the implications, what will be the implications of this on the business. I'm just too fired up to just go and achieve and just do. So yes, there's a place for insurance, but it's not a replacement for governance.
Thank you very much for that. I'll address the next question to Mrs. Orimolade. And the question is, could the cost of corporate governance be the reason why uh, fintechs don't pay attention to corporate governance? Could it be? Is this a misconception, or is it the bitter truth?
Okay, so I think it was Uche that kind of mentioned that earlier, that there is a cost, just like everything in this world, there's a
Yes.
cost to everything, right? And
Yes.
but there are ways and it could be to answer that question
Mhm.
directly. The perceived cost of governance could be the reason why fintechs don't pay attention to it. But the issue is this, like was rightly said by Uche, you need to balance. There's a cost that you pay, which will be far more than the cost of hiring an experienced CFO, hiring someone to develop corporate governance policies and so on, or even doing it in-house. The cost of reputational risk, like we just discussed now, there's so many risks that you can't push away. The cost of someone hacking into your system, these are all issues that will cost you far more and may even destroy your business if you don't pay that initial cost. Now, there are ways you can scale, I think it was Chris that rightly said, it's not everybody that expects. I've been part of a board, which is a not in the fintech industry, but the company is not profitable yet. So no director's fees, no sitting allowance, no nothing. We come, we give you advice and what have you. You could even start up with having an advisory board. Two people, maybe somebody in the industry and someone that has governance skills or anything, risk management skills that you start at the initial stage and what have you, that can guide you and direct you and so on. You don't pay them anything. You take them out for coffee, you take them out for lunch. So there are ways of scaling up because there are certain things that are mandatory, as has been said, that you can't afford to toy with, irrespective of the cost. That's why we're saying that there should be some advocacy so that the regulators are aware that there are cost implications of some of these startups regarding some of these issues. And I think this is something that is already being looked at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just thought because question just kept coming up. We have one hand raised. I don't know whether we have enough time to take that. Sean, do you have enough time?
Yeah, we can just take that as
Somebody.
the last question.
Okay, okay. The last question then would be from Blessing Choco. Please go ahead, Blessing.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Simi, and thank you, the distinguished speakers. My question has to do with fintech with regards to sustainability and the future of green economy. I know sometime January 31st, the Minister of Environment, Mrs. Sharon Ikajo, at the press conference in Abuja, drew the attention of the need to address the issues to climate change, which she said constitute a serious threat to Nigerian effort to poverty and eradication. And also, Mr. Obi SAN had said earlier, in recognition of the importance of sustainability, both SEC and the Exchange Limited have mandated sustainability reports from regulated entities. So what is FinTech NGR doing in respect to sustainability and the future of green economy? That will be all. Thank you.
Okay, since the question is addressed to the FinTech Association, I think I would go first and then I'll leave the floor open for the speakers to add one or two comments to it. The association is an advocacy group, and so when these things are discussed, what we try to do is understand that we share with members. Okay, we share the information with members, and we try to engage the regulators and other stakeholders in the sector uh, for advocacy purpose. I'm not sure if the fintech has anything lined up or if they've started advocacy in this regard, but I know that when it comes to current trends and current matters, the Fintech Association is always uh, on her head and on top of this. But sure, I don't know whether you want to add anything. Is there anything in the pipeline in terms of advocacy concerning enforcing sustainability report for fintech companies as well?
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, it's one of the things we are lining up for this year's edition of the Nigeria FinTech Week. Because we are looking at e-government, we are looking at sustainability. So this is going to form a major discourse at the event. You all agree that it's a new course entirely, but of course, it's part of what we are looking forward to featuring at the Nigeria FinTech Week. Yeah. But in case there are valuable things, key strategies that Blessing think we can quickly look at, you could share with us, and we take it off from there. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Cheryl. So, on that note, we're bringing this session to an end, and I want to once again thank our very, very distinguished speakers for an engaging and very robust discussion. It has indeed been, I would say, an enlightening session. It's not often, we get the likes of Mrs. Adeyemi, Mrs. Orimolade, and Mr. Obi in the same room to talk and share their vast experience on the matter and the subject that everybody knows to be their bread and butter. So thank you for making the time out today. It has indeed been an honor chatting with you and learning from your wealth of experience. We hope that you would always be available when the FinTech Association reaches out to you for this purpose again. And if there are any questions that I can see some questions coming up, maybe we'll just have them sent to you to have a look at, and then the association will share the response on the general platform later. Thank you so much for your time. Now to wish you a wonderful weekend. Back to you,
Yes, thank you very much, Simisola. Thank you, Mrs. DME, Mr. Uchivalubi, and Mrs. Olumalade. We're happy to have you on this event. It's been a very practical session, and most of the things are things that are very relatable. We thank you for giving us your invaluable time to be part of this. Maybe one of the things we would also like to raise again is the fact that the experts on this call, they are players within the ecosystem. And so we are strongly asking the fintechs, or even on the call, to leverage the advantage of this class of expert that we have in terms of helping you navigate that part. It can be very cumbersome, very tedious if you're going to do it yourself. So we are just saying Mrs. Adeyemi is available, Mrs. Yisomi is available, Mrs. Orimolade is available, but San is also available to further help you navigate this journey. So please feel free to reach out to us and see how you can leverage their network, their experience, even to better your corporate governance strategies and plans. Thank you once again for joining us on this call. Till we come your way again on June 28th, where we are then looking at cybersecurity and securing digital assets. If you are not yet a member of FinTech MDR, it's a time to pick up membership so that you are part of these great happenings within our ecosystem. Thank you very much. Do have a very lovely weekend ahead.
Okay, thank you, Sheung. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you,
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.